Hello and welcome back to Unleash the Goats, where we unleash ourselves upon the Star Wars franchise with reckless abandon, and nobody quite knows what we'll say next, least of all us. I'm Nat, she, her. Angela, say hi.
Hi, I'm Angela /Faye, she, her.
Sugar, say hi.
Hi, Sugar, she, her.
Happy birthday, Sugar.
Happy birthday month.
Happy birthday!
It is, in fact, your birthday month. I don't know if you knew that.
Just in case you forgot.
It's fine. I forget about it every year. I tried desperately to make sure my office forgets about it. I failed last year. I need to do better this year.
I believe in you.
I believe in you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. What are we talking about today, Sugar?
All right. So I chose redemption because it is a big topic that a lot of people have strong opinions on.
Can't imagine why.
I know. So I like to start these conversations by looking at the dictionary and figuring out what the dictionary has to say about redemption and what it is. So there's generally about 3 kinds of definition for redemption. The first is monetary, which is irrelevant to the discussion. The second is theological, which we're going to put a pin in. The last one is basically some sort of atonement. You've done something wrong. You're trying to make it better. That's just the general concept across about 6 or 7 different dictionaries that I looked at. But sometimes people seem to have their own sort of personal definition of redemption and how it overlaps often with things like absolution and forgiveness. So generally for me, I tend to think of it less as them being the same thing, because for some people it very much is, that redemption means you've been absolved or it means you've been forgiven. But for me it's more about you've actively done the work to make something better, and you have either fixed it or hit a point where the things you did wrong have gotten better. The people that you've hurt are no longer hurt. As a direct result of your actions, not just because you waited long enough, kind of thing. That you've put in the effort, and so you have therefore reached a level of redemption for yourself. Do you guys have your own definitions that you feel how does it interact for you with absolution and forgiveness? Absolution's usually everything's forgiven, you're totally fine, blank slate kind of shit now. Forgiveness obviously is its own kind of separate thing.
I feel like it depends on the person and the position for me, because for instance, if someone is going through a growth arc and we've had a bad relationship before and they want to have a good relationship now, that's going to be a different, I'm going to expect different things from them than if it's a stranger that I've heard about, or a criminal who's going through the criminal justice system, that kind of thing, because I don't know them, so what I expect from them is going to look different than what I expect from someone who I personally know. So I feel everybody's different, and as long as they're trying to improve is kind of my baseline, is if you were actually putting in the effort and putting in the work and are showing that, then I feel you are on a road to redemption. But I also don't know that I would ever consider someone in this life to be fully redeemed, I guess, because that seems then they can never make a mistake again.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not really fair. So if someone is on their path to be a better person, as long as they're on that path, then I'm not going to expect them to never slip up, if that makes sense. But I do think that's something that I have to keep in mind when I'm talking to people who or thinking about that, or I'm interacting with them, because I can't expect any other people to be perfect in the same way I don't expect me to be perfect.
Yeah, I think for me it's not once you're fully redeemed, it's you're redeemed of everything, right? You can never make mistakes, but you've done a specific wrong that you're trying to make right, and so you can be redeemed for that wrong. It doesn't mean you're not going to make a different mistake. You could even make the same mistake twice and have to be redeemed all over again for that. And so I feel I view it on an action basis and not not the person as a whole. And that's where I see the difference between absolution. I think absolution is closer to what you were talking about for me, where once you hit absolution, it's you've done nothing wrong ever now in your life, and this is your end perfection, right? Whereas redemption, I feel can be smaller when it needs to be.
Well, I feel it depends, because I feel you can be absolved with smaller things on a day-to-day thing. For instance, if my nephew stole $1 from me and he gave it back and he said sorry, I would consider him to be absolved of that crime, right? Like, that's over, it's done with. If he did it again, then I would consider it to be no longer absolved, right? Like, it would be a reopening of the wound. But, like, if he never did it again, it's over, it's done with, it's never happened again. Like, that is an absolution for him in that instance. I wouldn't really consider him needing a redemption. Whereas, like, if he was consistently taking money from people and then he stopped and started, like, fixing his problems, like, trying to repair those relationships, then I would consider that a redemption journey, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think the only thing I have to add is that to add another word that is closely related, like, I have forgiveness on a completely separate thing, because for me, when you forgive someone, that means that you're not holding it, like, you're not holding on to the anger for it. When they've redeemed themselves, like, that's when I'm like, I can forget about that happen, like, about that, the fact that happened, and, like, move forward. Like, I can forgive someone and still not trust them in the same way and not, like, let them continue that behavior. Even if they have done nothing differently, I can still forgive them because that has to do with me and my emotions towards them, and not, like, it, like Sugar said, it's not action-based for me. But when you get into, like, redemption and absolution, those feel very much in the wheelhouse of the person who is doing the harm changing their behavior or doing something about it.
In a similar vein, I don't think that they're going on a redemption journey, etc., means that I have to forgive them for the hurts they've done to me. So my forgiveness is completely separate from their personal journey to me. Like, for how I interact with people, I can forgive or not, like, how I kind of want or how I feel, and what they do doesn't really affect that. Like, sure, like, it's easier to forgive them if they're trying to make it up to me. But whether or not I do is more about, like, what I'm going through and my personal journey.
But the opposite might not be true, and that's kind of where I've hit on more, is, like, can you consider someone redeemed if no one they've hurt has ever forgiven them, kind of thing. Like, if they're on that journey, but, like, everyone who's been hurt is still hurt, is that really redeemed? And that's where I've ended up in sticky things, right? Is that, like, your forgiveness is separate, and it can be, but, like, at what point does forgiveness allow for redemption? You know, like, if you've never forgive your nephew for, you know, stealing that $1 from you because he never repaid it, like, you know, even if he never steals again, is that redeemed or not? You know, if you have chosen not to forgive him for that $1.
Right, but if he's paying it back and he's doing everything he can to try and earn my trust, and I haven't felt like I can ever trust him again, and I'm not giving him that forgiveness, that doesn't mean he's not putting in the work to get on his redemption journey. He's still a better person who has stopped stealing, whether or not I forgive him or not. So I understand what you mean, because I feel like it's kind of indicative of whether or not someone is actually on a redemption journey. But I don't necessarily, like, if your family's really shitty and you're making an effort to be a better person and none of them forgive you, that doesn't mean that you're not a better person. That just means your family's shitty.
Well, it's not just your family's shitty, though. It's like, you've caused someone harm, you've made them upset, and they've chosen not to forgive you for it. You know,
but it's still
it's not
up
just
to
my
them.
family's shitty. It's like, you know, I've caused a problem and I can't undo it. And if you can't undo the harm, are you redeemed?
I feel like yes, because as long as you're trying to make up for it, then, like, and you are doing your best, like, only they can know that, right? And so as long as, like, that's their thing and they are being a better person and they're no longer doing those things, then they are a better person, whether or not their family forgives them, because their family doesn't owe them that forgiveness. They don't have to forgive them no matter what they do to make up for it. But, like, that doesn't necessarily mean that they haven't changed and, like, become a better person. I don't know if they can ever reach absolution, because I feel like absolution is a little bit more tied to forgiveness, right? Because, yes, like, once I forgive my nephew, he's absolved of that crime. But like, he can, like, make up for his crimes and, like, be redeemed whether or not I forgive him or not. So I feel like absolution can be tied to, like, people's forgiveness around you, but I don't think redemption really can be, because whether or not you're putting forth the effort doesn't really have anything to do with whether or not people are forgiving you.
Interesting.
I think sometimes, too, there's a difference between people who see redemption as an end result and people who see redemption as just a constant journey. And so you never really reach redemption if you view it as a journey. It's just like, as long as you're on the journey, you are redeemed in the sense, as long as you continue to try to be a better person. But there are people who view redemption as an end result. And that's often how it works in stories, is that redemption, and especially redemption arcs in particular, involve there being an end result of redemption. And that was kind of what I was looking at here too, is like, what is a redemption arc? So usually a redemption arc involves obviously a story arc in general, where a selfish or immoral or villainous character has to redeem themselves and make amends for something they've done wrong, past failures, errors, you know, like, especially if the reader themselves has perceived it as something that was done wrong. You know, so there does have to be an end result that gets reached in order to consider it a redemption arc. And the arc itself has to be in like about reaching that end goal to some degree. And, you know, to your point, like that end goal doesn't have to be everyone has forgiven you necessarily. But there does have to be an end result reached. Obviously, there is a difference between character development and a redemption arc, because characters can develop into better people without it being a redemption arc. And I think that's something that gets confused a lot, personally. And so I split redemption arcs into two different kinds. There is the asshole redemption arc and the villain redemption arc. Because when I was doing this research and looking up what people felt like were some of the best redemption arcs in media, I started realizing that there's some that seem a little easier than others to manage. And their asshole redemption arc is like someone who's kind of an asshole, but not like killing people, not enslaving anybody. There's no major betrayals happening here. They're just kind of not that nice of a person. And so it's easier to turn them from just like kind of not a nice person into a better person. And it's still a redemption. They are undergoing character development and an arc of sorts, but like it's not as difficult as it is when you have a character who's been sitting there murdering, genociding, enslaving, betraying, lying, kind of thing. So some of my favorite examples of these characters, and a lot of these characters actually sometimes aren't antagonists. A lot of the times they're the protagonist of the story. So Schitt's Creek, the Rose family, start off as like very self-obsessed, you know, billionaires, and have to learn to be better people through, you know, a major loss. You know, almost everybody except Chidi in The Good Place is on the same concept. Obviously, The Good Place deals a lot with redemption and the concept of getting better and things like that. I put down Richie Jaramovich from The Bear. And also, one of my favorite examples of this is actually Leverage Redemption with Harry Wilson, who we are introduced to as, you know, Faye's really excited that I decided to bring this up. Harry Wilson is a lawyer who has been helping corrupt people basically cover up their own crimes, and he finally decides he's had enough of it and decides to join the Leverage team and kind of fight back. And there's a lot of discussion, some really great discussion in Leverage Redemption about redemption, and what it means for these different characters and whether some of them feel like they can ever reach it or not. And sometimes it is very like action-based, where a character like Elliot, who has actually physically murdered people in his past, feels like he's never quite going to be able to reach it because he can't undo the things he's done, whereas someone like, say, Sophie or Parker, who've done bad things, but they aren't, like, unfixable, can find that redemption. I think Harry Wilson is a wonderful, wonderful example of someone who is on that journey. I think Leverage Redemption does really well at looking at the different ways people can achieve or not redemption and what that means for them. You would like to talk about MASH, I think.
Yes. I don't know if any of our beautiful young listeners have ever seen MASH, because you should. It's a fantastic show, holds up very well. In MASH, in the early seasons, there's a character named Hot Lips Houlihan. Her name is Margaret. She's the head nurse. She's such a bitch. I love her so much. In the early seasons, she's like really obnoxious, really like Karen vibe. She always teams up with like the other antagonist, Frank Burns, and like causes problems. They're very straight-laced. But like, as the seasons go, she like loosens up more and more because she has like morals and a sense of like honor and like actually has a sense of shame, unlike Frank Burns. Love Frank. He's a great character, but like he sucks. He's supposed to. But like I really enjoy that like she slowly like grows and grows and grows as a person, becomes more and more complex as the seasons go, and they work really hard. It's a comedy show, so everybody has to still be funny. So even as she's like growing as a person, she still has to be a funny person, and she retains a lot of her like straight-laced things where she still does follow the rules. She still thinks the same things are important, but she's no longer sleeping with the guy who's cheating on his wife. She's no longer being a hypocrite. Like, she's growing as a person along with everybody else and retaining what makes her her, while like becoming a good person. And I like that part of like redemption stories like that, where they go from like being an asshole to being funny, when they don't lose what makes them them. They just keep the parts that are important to them, and they lose the parts that made them a jerk.
Yes. I think that's like something that shows up a lot in the asshole stuff, less so in the villain stuff, because the villain stuff, you really got to push those characters in like a 180 direction in order to consider them at all redeemed, because they've been pretty nasty beforehand. So these are characters who are like full-fledged antagonists or villains. At almost no point are these going to be like true protagonists. They've usually committed some pretty serious crimes. Again, this is like murder, genocide, enslavement, like serious betrayals. And so it's going to take a lot more work and effort to convincingly actually turn them around. And convince the audience that they're like actually a better redeemed person. And again, kind of reach that end goal of a redemption arc of the audience believing they are now a better person than they were before. So my personal favorite version of this, and I'm fairly certain we don't have any Turkish viewers, but if we do, I'm so fucking sorry. I am trying really hard to figure out how to say these characters' names, but I'm about to butcher a couple of Turkish names. I'm really sorry. So the name of the show is Resurrection Ertuğrul. The character's name is Seljan. She is pretty much fully an antagonist or a villain within the first season. For anyone who doesn't know this show, by the way, which I'm going to assume is pretty much everyone, if not most of you, this show was a show that had about 25 to 30 episodes a season, and they're all about 2 hours long.
Ooh.
And when it moved to Netflix a while back, it's not there anymore, but when it moved to Netflix, they got broken into 45-minute chunks because I guess Netflix decided its American audience wasn't going to handle that well. So then it became 70 to 100 episodes per season. So when I say she was a villain or an antagonist for one season, this is a large chunk of time. She does some nasty shit. She's really self-obsessed. She is almost entirely unlikable for the entirety of this first season. And by the end of it, though, she starts realizing actions have consequences. Oh no, the two people she actually gives a damn about are starting to be impacted, directly or indirectly, by her choices. And she starts kind of churning herself around a little bit. She ultimately confesses to those crimes that she has committed. Everyone's upset with her for very obvious reasons. And then she does a whole, like, jumps in front of an arrow to sacrifice herself kind of thing, and everyone decides to forgive her at the end. She wouldn't be on the list if that's where it ended. The reason she's on this list is because it didn't end there. You get to that second season, and it's like a 2-year jump or so, and all of a sudden those people who forgave her don't really forgive her. Like, they've, like, it eats at them, it grates at them over these last 2 years, and their relationship with her has devolved since then. And even the people who kind of are still being kind to her don't totally trust her because she proved herself super untrustworthy before. And so she ends up in a situation where she knows that there's this other antagonist now, who's basically just her in another skin. But like, that's why she can recognize this other antagonist for what they are, but she's now the boy that cries wolf. And so every time she tries to say, like, no, she's bad, she's out to get you, she's out to get all of us, she's done this terrible thing, nobody trusts her, no one believes her. And every time she says something, they're remembering all the times in season 1 that she tried saying similar things, and it turns out that it was total lies, total bullshit, very manipulative, she hurt a lot of people, so now, instead of trusting her, they feel like she's just being manipulative and falling back on old habits and breaking her promise to do better when she's actually doing the opposite. And she spends the entirety of this second season stuck in the hard place between knowing that her commitment to wanting to be a better person means she has to, like, speak up, but also knowing that no one's going to believe her. And like, does she quiet herself in order to like try to make peace, or does she speak up to, try to bring the truth to light? And she, like, her relationships with people just keep getting worse, and or, like, her husband starts getting physically abusive. Her sister disowns her. She, like, she gets kicked out of her own home, and has to go live somewhere else so her husband can take a second wife that isn't her. And it's just absolutely heartbreaking. Like, this woman that was so incredibly unlikable for 70 episodes in the first season is like, your favorite person in the second season, because it just is impossible not to feel for her. And by the end of it, when all the truth finally gets revealed and everyone realizes that she'd been telling the truth this whole time, they have to apologize to her now. And it's like they've kind of shattered each other, through all of this. And it's her actions that started it. Like, they've got super sympathetic reasons for not believing her and not trusting her. And I love that they let these characters really feel the pain of what she did to them and not forgive her for it until she, like, really goes through this effort of, like, sacrificing everything, her relationships, her emotional well-being, to try to save them, to do everything she can, even when it means she's losing the people she cares about to this effort. So when she finally, gets that forgiveness a second time, it feels so earned, and it feels like now it's going to last because she put that effort in, and it works now. And I've never seen anything else like that, and it just, like, hit me so hard. And so that's kind of one of my favorite ones. And there's some other good ones that I put down here, but I wanted to give other people a chance to talk about some of their favorites.
I just threw Spike in here because he's like your classic Buffy the Vampire villain redemption, because he's a villain in the first, like, 2 or 3 seasons. Like, tries to kill them, tries to kill the world. But he's not quite... He's always, like... He's the main villain, but he never, like, goes quite as far as other villains go. Like, he doesn't really want to kill the world. He mostly just kind of wants to, like, kill everybody else and then drink wine with his girlfriend. Like, he's fine with killing everybody. He just doesn't want to kill the world because he likes wine type stuff. Like, he's very... not relatable, but, like, his motivations are never, like, total destruction the way other villains are. And then after he gets, like, neutered in, like, season 4 and he can no longer harm humans, then he slowly becomes a better person. But they put a lot of work into his redemption. I will give this with a caveat that I personally don't like Spike that much, but I recognize they did a lot of good work to making him a more interesting character, and, like, getting him to a point where it was believable that at the end of the series he would be willing to sacrifice himself to save everybody else because he is now a hero. But it's not like people are just, like, fine with him once he's, like, he's like, I'm on the good guy's side now. They're all like, you tried to kill me, like, last week. You would kill me now if you weren't neutered. Like, it's very much like no one is forgiving him for what he does until it's been, like, a lot longer and he's genuinely put in some work to become a better person. And that's part of, like, what makes him an interesting character, is that there's always, like, a tension of, like, if he's going to, like, go back or not. By the time you get to, like, season 6, it's pretty definitive that, like, he's not, and, like, he's put in a lot of work to be better. And, like, I believe there's an arc where the way that his thing works is that he doesn't have a soul, and then in, like, season 6-ish he goes and, like, finds his soul. Eventually he gets ensouled on purpose. Sure. But it doesn't really... What's interesting about it is that it doesn't really change who he is as a person the way it does for other characters who get souled and insouled and, like, lose their souls and get their souls back. Is, like, he kind of stays the same person. He just has more empathy with the soul. But it doesn't really change who he is. He's still the same person. He's just a little better at being good, if that makes sense. And I liked how they did that, and they drew it out, and they made sure that it was still in character the whole time, because he genuinely sucks in, like, the first seasons. Like, he's so mean. he's a really good villain, but, like, he's awful. Like, he's just like, yeah, I'm just gonna kill you. Like, they have, like, a flashback where it's, like, this young, gorgeous woman that he's, like, fighting. He's a young slayer. He, like, and just kills her, just snaps her neck, takes her out. He has a young kid at the time, and he does not care at all. And, like, going forward to him now, where, like, Buffy's willing to leave him with her baby sister to babysit, like, it's a big jump in, like, his character development. But they do it so naturally that until you like are watching different episodes, it doesn't really, like, click how much he's changed.
Yeah. I will briefly mention Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is arguably like he arguably starts as a protagonist and not an antagonist, unless you're looking like directly at Aang himself. I think the reason that Zuko's redemption arc feels so important to me is that, one, it's very because it's a show made for kids, probably, like, it's very explicitly spelled out that that is what is happening. Like, Zuko, like, physically gets sick, and Iroh is talking to him about how he is going through, like, a personal change. His values are changing. And two, something that I love about Zuko is that in his attempts to, like, make things right, I think that he successfully, like, undoes the harm that he caused. He's obviously, like, Zuko's a very complex character. We could spend hours on him, and probably people have. That's not the podcast that you're currently listening to, but they exist, I'm sure. But I do feel like Zuko, the actions that he takes at the end are big enough and have a big enough impact that when you look at him as a villain, it's like, yeah, we can totally forgive that, because here's all the good you did once you did change.
Yeah, there's a lot of places people have talked about why Zuko works, and you had initially included him on our notes section before I split it into asshole and villain redemption arcs, and so I kind of had to make a choice about where I wanted to put him, and I left him under villain because he does, I think, personally, I would still say that he starts as an antagonist. He is perhaps a more minor antagonist than some of the others, but he is, like, the first one we're introduced to. He is definitely the one who comes up the most consistently throughout that first season. But there is an interesting balance where he is his own protagonist in some ways as well, and so there's a balance between him being kind of just like the protagonist asshole and also an actual antagonist to the main character, and the ways that they make sure he doesn't fall too far into either one. And I do think that was done very well. I hadn't included him initially, mostly because I think Zuko gets a lot of attention, and I was trying to put attention on characters who get less. But he is obviously, like, the quintessential redemption arc that works, that everybody knows about. So, yes, we are acknowledging that. The last thing that I want to talk about in this section is that, obviously, like, not every story that looks at redemption is doing a redemption arc. Sometimes redemption is a theme, but, like, the characters aren't undergoing a real arc. And some of them that you meet are perhaps in the middle of it or already at the end of it, of their redemption arcs. And so, these things can look very, very different in different stories. And the last thing I will say in this section is that redemption via death is not actually a redemption arc in and of itself. You can end a redemption arc in death if you put in that work, but the death itself is not an arc. It's just a death. And we're going to put a pin in that and come back to it in a minute.
I think we need to talk about Callus.
I actually just had to talk about Callus to a friend of mine who's seen none of the Callus stuff. And had no idea who he was, and I got to explicitly tell her about how bad he was. Unfortunately, it meant that she never wants to see Rebels.
You did it!
I'm so sorry.
And I was like, that's unfortunate, because I actually do like Rebels, but the only thing she knows about it now is Callus and how terrible he is. Alright, so, Star Wars likes to look at redemption a lot. Sometimes it's really impactful and it's really great, and sometimes it stinks doggy do shit. So what I kind of decided is sometimes the problem is that there are characters who seem like they're supposed to be having redemption arcs, but the writers don't actually want to go through that work, because it does take effort and work. Like Faye mentioned, like with Spike, it's multiple seasons worth of time and effort put into gradually changing that character. With the character Seljan, this was 70 episodes of her being an asshole and like 100 episodes of her going through some really nasty, awful shit to try and make up for it. Zuko, is constantly revolving throughout three seasons worth of time. And he's not even quite all that bad to begin with. There's other things happening with Zuko, but there is time and effort that has to go into some of these redemption arcs, and it sometimes feels like Star Wars doesn't want to actually put in that time or effort, and so they shortcut it, and then it stinks. So sometimes there's like lack of acknowledgement of these past sins or crimes that can make the redemption feel confusing, unearned, and unsatisfying, and occasionally actively offensive. And they're pretty much always villain redemption arcs rather than asshole redemption arcs, because obviously the asshole redemption arcs are a little bit easier. So the worst one, I think in all of our opinions, that I know Nat hasn't seen Rebels, but Nat's heard us talk about this a lot, is Alexander Callis, which might be a controversial choice.
Ooh, full naming him. Okay.
Fuck yeah, Alexander
Strap in.
Callis from Star Wars Rebels seems to often get considered a really good redemption arc. I've seen it a lot. Like, he shows up a lot, but to be fair, so does Kylo Ren occasionally on some of these articles.
Ew!
I know. Can't trust these redemption arcs lists on the websites. But I remember kind of hearing about this before I even started to watch Rebels, that Callus was considered this, like, fan favorite character because of his redemption arc. And then I watched it, and then I was like, wow, I don't know what anyone is talking about. This is absolutely god-awful. So for anyone who hasn't seen Star Wars Rebels, Alexander Callis, he's an ISB agent for the Empire, actively hunting down our main characters. But more importantly to the discussion here, he is said from the very beginning, from when we meet him, that he led a genocide against one of the main characters' planets. And those people are, like, basically all gone. As far as they know, there is one left, and it's one of our ensemble characters. And Callus laughs at him and is actively hunting him down to try and get rid of this last survivor. He's got a trophy from that genocide, like a weapon that he took from one of the people that he presumably killed, and he's using that to try and kill this last survivor. He's clearly just like an irredeemable, awful, horrific person. He sends his own coworkers to death with a smile on his face. That's the kind of person that he is. And this is pretty much all you get out of Callus for about a season and a half. And then about halfway through season 2, there is a single episode where he and the genocide survivor, whose name is Zeb, get stuck in a cave together, and by the end of it, they've managed to decide that he's a good guy now. But they did this by deciding to tell us that, by the way, that genocide we told you that he led, he didn't lead it. He lied. He was there, he participated, but it wasn't his idea, so it's not his fault.
Oh, so it's fine, actually.
And then it gets worse from there, because then they decide that the reason he was participating in this genocide is because when he was younger and had just joined the Empire, he had an experience where he went after a group of rebels, and the only one, they'd escaped, and the only one left behind was one of this species, the Lasat, and this rebel managed to kill off the rest of the squad.
As he should. Fuck the Empire.
In self-defense and defense of a bunch of his other presumably rebel friends. Callus has decided that this is a total reason to be super racist and take out the entire rest of the species and blame the rest of the species for the deaths of his 3 Nazi squad mates.
As they should have died, because they were Nazis.
Because they were Nazis.
And this person was 100% correct.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And he learned nothing from this experience.
Nothing. It gets worse. Because then...
You've told me all of this before, and I'm like, how does it get worse?
It gets worse. Because then, they decide to tell Zeb, this survivor of a genocide, that his judgment of Imperial officers before he gets to know them is equivalent to the racist choice to blame all of the Lasat for this one rebel killing a couple of Imperial soldiers.
And listeners,
We
that's
all
wrong.
lives mattered, this bitch.
Oh my god.
Somehow Kylo Ren's redemption arc is better than this.
Isn't it? It's like just that slight less offensive, and it gets like even more even more awful when you remember that Callus, who is clearly a white character, like in context, is voiced by a black guy. And so, like, they had to make him go through this, and he had to give the all lives matter excuse as a part of his job, obviously, when voicing this character. And I'm just like, oh, that must have probably not been all that fun. And so, like, from that point on, like, you never really see Callus thinking about this or, like, doing a lot about this. He goes back to the Empire. The next time we see him, he decides to help the main characters this time. And he's like, oh, tell Zeb that we're even now. And then, like, by the end of the season, you learn that all of a sudden he's been spying for the rebellion somehow and giving them information. Like, we didn't know this. At no point did we see this happen or understand why he went from just, I am repaying a debt to I am actively rebelling. And it all happens just because of this one time in a cave. And it only works because you retcon the original backstory.
That's disgusting. That's gross.
And that's Callus, the worst redemption arc possibly in Star Wars history.
That's so offensive.
There's a couple of others that I actively hate, but we can kind of wander over them. I don't like Crosshair. I think Crosshair was done really badly, but I'm the only one who's seen The Bad Batch, so we're going to skip over that.
I will say that I hated Crosshair the first moment I met him.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the minute he was rude to my baby boys, the minute he was rude to the rest of the clones, I was like, actually, I hate you. And there's no redeeming you.
Oh, right. Back in Clone Wars when he first shows up and he's a bigot towards the other clones. Yes.
Which is the only one I've seen, because why the fuck would you be so rude to the rest of the clones? I'm sorry, you're not better than them just because you have a random mutation and they put you in a new program. Get over yourself. Anyways.
Yeah. And then Bo-Katan was the last one I had up here as a... Because I don't even know that she's been given a redemption arc per se. It's just that, like, she kind of comes in and out. And she was introduced as a full-on terrorist.
They're just kind of ignoring the fact that she used to be a terrorist.
And they're just, she's living in a space where they're just kind of ignoring a lot of what her backstory was in order to kind of rewrite her in this new world. Mm-hmm. And I find that actively frustrating.
Yeah.
Because I think she'd be more interesting if they really honed in on that and focused on it and, like, the impact of the choices that she's made. But
Did you
yes.
give Anakin his own section?
I fucking did, yes. We're gonna get to Anakin in a second.
Shall we discuss the best ones? Because I want to talk about Reva.
Yeah.
I love Reva so much. Reva puts in the work, first of all. Reva knows she's fucked up, and she knows what she has to do to make her life better and to be a better person, and then she does it. And I love her so much. I need an entire show about her, and the fact that we're not getting one because racist fanboys suck is an endless source of frustration. Why do I have to not have good things because other people suck? That seems
unfair.
like it's
Unfair.
against... Yeah, it's unfair, and also it's against the common good.
That's so true. I will say that I don't know that Reva has gone... That I would count Reva as having gone through a whole redemption arc, because I think Reva kind of like reaches the beginning of what should be a redemption arc.
Yes.
By the end of the show. Because she spends most of that show being, like, pretty villainous.
When she starts on it, she knows what she's going to do to accomplish it. If that makes sense?
To accomplish her...
Like...
by the time you reach the end, like, once she's changed, is that what you mean?
Yeah, like, at the end of it, she's like, I know the direction that I'm heading to be redeemed. I feel like sometimes you have villains who, like, decide to, like, be good, and they're like, okay, what do I do now? Like, how do I be good? She doesn't have that issue. She knows where she's going and what she has to do to be better. And I feel like that's why I, like, even though we haven't actually seen the redemption arc, I still kind of think of her as redeemed, because she's clearly going to do it. She's clearly, like, on this journey, and even if I never see her in any Star Wars media ever again, I know that she did all of the work and she put in the hours to be a good person again.
Yeah, I included her in this because in our favorite section, I decided to make it not redemption arc specific. It is like any use of redemption within Star Wars. So, like, I think that there's a lot of talk about redemption happening in the Obi-Wan Kenobi show too, in a number of different places. It's for Obi-Wan, for Anakin, for Reva. Tala obviously hits this. Sometimes, like, the rebel character to some degree, Haja to some degree. Like, it's really, like, heavy-handed. Well done, but, like, a little bit heavy-handed as, like, the theme of that show. But I do love the way they did it with Reva, and I think it's, like, not dissimilar to Zuko in the sense that I think they were very careful about how they introduced Reva and the ways that they gave us information about her, so that by the time she changes her mind at the end, it doesn't feel completely out of left field.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the things I liked best about her, is that I think her motives are super clear, and I think that the movement from one section to another was really well done. I did also put Dogma here, which I know the rest of you have seen Clone Wars, and I don't remember if you saw the Umbara arc, but Dogma is a character who exists in 4 episodes. I think only 3, actually, because I think he's actually not in all 4 episodes of the Umbara arc. But he exists solely in one arc of the Clone Wars. But he starts off as like this poor little dude who's just like really into following the rules to some degree. He's very loyal, very uptight, and this forces him to kind of like follow orders that are bad. And he has to, and so he struggles with, pushing against those orders the way the other clones find more easy. And this puts him against the other clones sometimes. And by the end of it, he realizes just how badly that's fucked up a lot of things, and, what a bad judgment call he's made. And so at the end, when he realizes that Rex can't make the ultimate sacrifice, that it just isn't going to happen, Dogma decides to make it for him. And we've never heard anything else about what the fuck happened to Dogma. We have to just assume he probably died. But, like, I kind of love this, like, little mini arc that he went on. Again, like, I don't know that I would consider it a whole ass redemption arc, because he kind of makes just, like, an 11th hour change. But I think that it's, like, a really cool kind of look at, like, difficult decisions in wartime, and the ways that he, you can sort of find strength and courage and things like that. Galen Erso was another one I put down here for those of you who liked Rogue One. Galen Erso is a character who goes through pretty much his entire redemption arc off screen, between the prologue in the movie and then the movie beginning properly. But I do think that it's just like this very interesting kind of look at redemption through his character. And then I've talked about Vizago before. But I swear to God, Vizago is the only true redemption arc in Star Wars that works. Because Vizago is a character who does actually actively change. Like, he starts off as a minor antagonist, makes one slightly better decision, which leads to, like, kind of a realization for him about his relationship to the main characters. And you see him undergoing a change, and by the end of it, he's standing next to the heroes. He's such a minor character that, like, he gets very little actual attention. But I feel like it is a genuine redemption arc because he is changing across the entire 4 seasons of Rebels. And I believe it. I believe that he's changed, so that, like, the experiences that he has with Ezra, allows him to become a better person. And I absolutely adore that for him. Anyone else want to talk about redemption in Star Wars that isn't Anakin?
I did want to say, going back to Dogma a little bit, I did think that he had moments throughout the episodes where you could see him questioning his own decisions. So he still sticks to it, but, like, I don't know if it was necessarily an 11th hour change. It's more like he starts having doubts, but he doesn't let the doubts, like, sway his decision, right? He still sticks to his decision to, like, follow orders.
Yeah, and I think he doesn't like what he's doing all the time, but, like, he's going to do it anyway. Because I think, yeah.
It's still clear that he understands what they're saying, and he wants to, like, I don't know if he wants to necessarily the whole time, but, like, he wants to believe them. He wants to be able to trust them and, like, make the correct decision here. He's just not really sure what the correct decision is, so he's sticking with going by the rules because he knows that he's supposed to do that. And so I feel like they did a decent job of threading it.
It's also, like, the thing with Dogma is not rules precisely, it's loyalty to the Jedi. And so right. Dogma 1000% believes that the Jedi know better than anyone and everyone else.
I mean, his name is Dogma.
Yes, he's named very, very heavy-handedly, but, like, yeah. But yeah, that is, like, the core belief that everything in him, like, surrounds, is this idea that the Jedi know everything, and, like, even if you don't understand why they're asking you to do something, that doesn't mean it's wrong, and that you're likely the one who's wrong. You just don't get it. And so when Krell starts making choices that everyone else doesn't like, Dogma's reaction is, you just don't get why he's doing it. That doesn't mean it's wrong. And we should just trust that he knows what he's doing, that he has a plan he's not telling us. And, like, he can't let that go until he finally gets proof that Krell is actually actively sabotaging them. Because up until that point, even if he doesn't like what he's doing, he's never going to change, because that one core belief, like, is everything. He cannot move away from that. So yes, you see that he doesn't like what he's doing. You see that he, like, kind of agrees that, like, some of these choices maybe don't make sense, but it just doesn't matter. Because he never expected to be able to understand every choice a Jedi ever made. Dogma's a very interesting character I've spent a lot of time thinking about. But So I do think it's an 11th hour change in the sense that, like, that core belief of the Jedi know everything, he never questions that until Krell turns around and says, oh, no, yeah, like, I'm 100% a traitor. And he goes like, oh, shit, well, like...
I know what to do with traitors.
Well, I guess I was wrong then. Like, everything I've ever believed has been wrong. And so then, yes, like, when they turn around and Rex is about to shoot Krell, but he can't do it, Dogma kind of makes the decision to do it instead, in part because he just hates Krell, in part because he, like you said, he knows what to do with the traitor, and in part, too, because we kind of have to assume that, like, there is a sacrifice that has to be made here. They cannot leave Krell alive, but if they kill him on their own without a higher authority telling them it's okay, the person who does it is going to be punished as a result. And Dogma decides to take that sacrifice on instead of Rex when he realizes Rex can't go through with it. And so there is a sacrifice kind of happening at the end. Some of it's for himself, some of it is like vengeance and justice, but some of it, I think, is a sacrifice being made to protect Rex. And I deeply, deeply want him back. I would love to have, like, figured out what had happened to him and have him, like, somehow have survived. But that seems very unlikely to happen given how minor of a character he is. But we're moving on to the Anakin of it all. So.
Strap in.
We're going to spend a little bit of time on Anakin because I think Anakin is complicated. So remember that pin I put in theological redemption? We're bringing that out. I think Anakin is redeemed cosmically. This is like a divine redemption. Anakin is not necessarily, he does not undergo an arc of any kind. He also kind of makes an 11th hour, decision to make a sacrifice for one dude. But, like, he also clearly is standing next to Yoda and Obi-Wan as a ghost, which means that, like, the Force has chosen to offer him absolution and redemption as a result of that sacrifice that he made. So, like, I can't say he's not redeemed, because there is an element of him that is redeemed with narratively, but I think it comes primarily from the divine, and not from Anakin actively going on that journey, as Faye mentioned. There is no real journey happening for Anakin where he actively tries to better himself and be a better person and do better things and earn people's forgiveness, try to fix all the harm that he's done. I think you can make a solid argument it would never be possible. Like, he has done 25 years worth of damage to this galaxy that's never going to be undone.
Not to mention, you could argue that he's responsible for all damage the Empire does because he's the reason the Empire exists, because he decides to.
Yeah. 100%. You could blame him for all of it because it's his decision that means they get to rise. He had the decision between the Jedi and Palpatine, and he chose Palpatine, and he could have not, So yes, he absolutely can be held responsible for the entirety of the Empire's atrocities against the galaxy. How do you gain redemption from that? Is there any true way to go on a journey that allows you that without what happens in canon, which is just he dies and gets cosmically redeemed?
While I wouldn't say that it is a classic redemption journey where he's actually putting in the work, I wouldn't say that he doesn't change over the course of the movies and doesn't have some progression in his character, because a specific example I'm thinking of is in episode 4 and 5. Both of those movies have instances where Vader has an officer fail him, or not necessarily an officer fail him. Something happens where he doesn't get what he wants and the rebels get away, and then he kills that officer. He chokes them out, he murders them, whatever. And then in the third movie, in episode 6, the rebels get away. He loses his chance to catch Luke because they managed to fix I don't remember exactly what happens. I'm blanking on exactly what happens.
It doesn't matter. The rebels
get away. You know
those
movies better than I do.
The rebels get away in the 6th movie, and Admiral Piet the look on his face, he is certain he's going to die because the rebels got away, and every time this has happened before, Vader has killed someone, usually the person in charge, and like that's how Piet got promoted, was his superior got murdered because he failed, and Vader killed him, and Vader turns and he walks away. And it is a small change, to be fair. But I do think that there are subtle changes like that in the movies to show that Vader is becoming softer and is softening. And I don't think it's done I don't think it's done in a more like classic arc like Zuko, where he's actively like changing and growing and becoming a better person. I think it's almost against his will in some ways, but like that he is growing and he is changing over the course of the movies, which I do like. They do it very subtly because he is still an antagonist, but he does change, which I do enjoy. I like the subtle things that Lucas does to show you that Vader is changing because of Luke.
I think this is where we hit, like, you're a lot kinder towards him than I am. I don't see any of those things. I don't think that him just choosing not to choke out one dude is him actually being a better person. Like, I think he just didn't care that time, you know? Like, I don't think that's ever hit me as, like, a, wow, he could have killed that guy and he didn't. Like, I've never, ever had that reaction to that moment the few times I've watched that movie. I don't really see anything else in his character that really changes all that much. He's pretty nasty towards Luke when they meet. He's really insistent that he's not any different, that there's no Luke Skywalker left in him, you know, and it feels very much like he hits a rock bottom and has no way to fight back. Luke's gonna die. It's a lose-lose situation for him. What's he gonna do? You know?
But I feel like one of the things that Lucas does in his movies is that a lot of times he has characters say one thing and tells you that what they're saying is wrong. Like, for instance, with the whole, like, Padme thing with Anakin, is that, like, Padme is saying... Lucas does this. Padme is telling you she doesn't want to sleep with Anakin, but Lucas is telling you that Padme does. He is telling you via the movie that Padme is in love with him. And, yes, it doesn't come across very well, but that's, like, a thing that he does in his movies, is he's like... Vader says there's no Anakin left in me, and Luke is like, you're lying to me. You are lying. I can feel the conflict in you right now. And that is like a thing
he accepts it by the end, though. Yes, that's where you get the whole, like, well, then my father's truly dead line. Like, he accepts that by the end.
Right, but he's saying that, and then you immediately have Vader go and have an emotional reaction to that, where he leans against the railing and he's like, oh, well then, because, like, Luke is saying that because he's like, okay, well, that's the consequence of your actions then. And Vader's like, oh, well, I don't want that. Like, he's upset that Luke says this because he doesn't want his father to be dead. He wants to be Luke's father. Like, you have, like, the movie, like, yes, that Luke says that, but, like, clearly he doesn't really mean it, because then the second he gets a chance to argue with Vader about it again, he immediately starts up the argument again. And so you have this, like, kind of back and forth between them of Vader insisting one thing and Luke being like, I literally know it's not true, though, because we have the Force, Dad. We're telepathically connected. I can feel your emotions right now. So I know you're lying to me.
Yeah.
Just like when Luke is over here like, I'm going to be super good now. There's no conflict in me. And Vader's like, I can feel you slipping to the dark side right now. Actually, you're lying.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, like, you can't say he's not redeemed. There is a cosmic redemption happening. And I think, like, to some degree, you have to kind of be willing to believe that Vader would pick Luke over Palpatine. You know, so there is some element of that you have to believe that, like, Vader would pick Luke over Palpatine when he's forced into that choice. You know, so you have to believe that enough. And, like, you know, I think if you, like, ignore most of the other stuff, we find out that he does. You know, and just, like, look at the original trilogy by itself in a vacuum, that's enough. Because really the only person he's ever hurt directly is Luke. Like, you've tried to argue real hard with me before that he's not responsible for Alderaan because he didn't give the order.
I mean...
And, you know, I don't agree, but, like, you can make the argument if you want to that he's not responsible for Alderaan, so you can't hold him accountable for that. There's no forgiveness necessary for that. So who's the only person he's actually... And you've argued before that Obi-Wan sacrifices himself and Darth Vader does not kill him. So there's no forgiveness necessary for that, right? So, like, the only person he directly hurts that, like, really matters is Luke getting his fucking arm chopped off. And it's Luke he saves at the end. So it's a direct, like, the person I've hurt is the person I am saving, and that person chooses to forgive me, so therefore I am redeemed. However, the more we learn about Vader, the more things have been added to his red ledger, the less and less that feels like enough. And so then it's like, I'm sorry, like, the clones did not get unenslaved. They spent their entire lives being fucked over, and it's Anakin's fault. The Republic is gone, and it's Anakin's fault. Padme dies, and you can pretty solidly argue it's Anakin's fault. The Jedi are gone, it's Anakin's fault. Like you said, you can blame the entirety of the Empire's atrocities now on Anakin, because we know how that happened, and that it was all his fault. And it's like, I'm sorry, but just saving Luke is no longer enough. It isn't.
I think it's an interesting flip of the Peter Parker line of, with great power comes great responsibility, because the difference between Vader and a random Moff like Tarkin or the blue guy. What is his
Thrawn?
name? Thrawn. Between Tarkin and Thrawn is that like Vader has the power to fix these things. He has the power to kill the Emperor the whole time. I mean, not necessarily perfectly because the Emperor's pretty strong, but like he has the ability to change what's happening and he chooses not to. Whereas like Thrawn or Tarkin, if they decided to go rogue, they would just die. If they decided all of a sudden like, oh, I'm actually gonna like go on a redemption journey and be a better person now, they're just gonna die. Palpatine's just gonna kill them. Like they might save a couple people. They might like make some personal differences, but like they're not actually going to make a change on a cosmic level the way that Vader could if he decided to go. And I feel like that's why he has more responsibility to go fix on a redemption journey were he to go on a proper one, because he always had the ability for 25 years to fix these problems that are happening in the galaxy, and he doesn't fix them. He doesn't act. And even though a lot of the problems that happen aren't a direct result of his actions, because they're not. They're from Palpatine. Palpatine is the one who's doing all these things, coming up with these horrible things and like oppressing all these people directly. Vader's complicit because he has the ability to stop him and he never does.
And he is directly responsible for a lot of terrible things happening too.
Yeah, but he kind of just like puts himself in his little sad coffin and is depressed for 25 years. Sometimes like he gets sent off to like on a leash to go murder people and cause problems and like kill people and like be an issue, but like he's not like coming up with new creative tortures to like oppress people on Ferrix or something. Like that's not really his job. Well, Palpatine really enjoys that.
No, but he is like hunting Obi-Wan down for 10 years and spending a lot of time with the Inquisitors and torturing and hurting the Inquisitors. We know that. So it's like he is doing some things of his own direction and his own will. That are very much on Anakin, and they're not just like Palpatine told you to go do a thing and you did it. There is like, Anakin is given the Inquisitors and basically told to do whatever as long as they become his dogs, and so he goes like, sure, cool, and tortures them for like however long it takes to do that. We see him interacting with the Inquisitors even in the Kenobi show, and it's not positive.
I do wonder if like part of this is because a lot of the legend stuff is much puts a lot more stuff on Palpatine and makes Vader more of like a victim of Palpatine in the Legends. Cause like a lot of Legends material is that like he's basically Palpatine's attack dog and doesn't really get to do a lot. Like he's not in charge of the Inquisitors in Legends, that kind of thing. And in like more of like the new Disney stuff, that kind of thing, they give Vader more to do and they make him more of like a primary villain for a lot of for a lot of protagonists. Because people like him, because he's a fan favorite, and so they get more content out of making him more of a villain, like having him do more evil things.
There's also potentially like a pre-prequels and post-prequels thing there, where like pre-prequels you don't know how responsible Anakin is. That's not the story. Whereas like once you see the prequels, you realize that the whole story is that this was Anakin's choice. It's his agency, his choice that doomed everyone. And so I think post-prequels, you could maybe see that as like a recurring theme that keeps coming back, is that Anakin's choices matter, and that it's him making active choices every day that continue to doom the galaxy. And so there might be some of that too, that like pre-prequels, Vader's just kind of wandering around as this random dude in a robot suit, and eventually you find out that the Emperor is up there, above him, kind of giving him orders, but like, like there's not a lot else that we know about that relationship, so it would be easy to like turn Vader into Palpatine's attack dog and very little else. But I think post prequels you get a very different like theme surrounding Anakin as a character.
Yeah, and I feel like once you have like that like level of villainy from a character, it is much harder to redeem them. And like you were saying, it doesn't really cut it at the end of 6 because that only really works for what he's done to Luke and not what he's done to the rest of the galaxy personally. Because, once you see him like stab all these people in the middle of the heart, you're like, did him dying for Luke really make up for all these stabbing people in the middle of the heart?
I'm sorry. There's an entire scene where he murders children. Twice.
There are 2.
Twice.
Yeah.
Like, I had to watch him. I mean, to be fair, we don't watch him murder babies the first time, but we do get to watch it happen the second time. Like, you put sad music over the Jedi dying from the clones. I spent a lot of time with the clones feeling very sad about their position. Like, I'm sorry, it's not enough, with all the things that he's done. So I think the only way you could ever give him redemption is to make it cosmic, because otherwise it's like, wow, this is an insane amount of effort you have to put in to, like, convince me that Vader was willing to put in the work to be a better person and then actually did it. You know, so the only way you can manage it is this cosmic redemption that he does actually get, but I don't know that I would call that an arc, because I don't think he actually works to earn redemption at any point. Like, even if you claim he softens a little, it's not in an effort to be better. It's just maybe, at most, a reaction to Luke being in his life now, like, as an existence, you know, something that's there, and that Luke rejected him. Like, it's a reaction to Luke's rejection at best, and not, like, an active choice to try to be better in a way that he was making active choices to be worse.
I will say that, like, I think that the way that Anakin's character kind of functions in the prequels and in the originals is that he kind of has the kind of personality that turns on a dime, if that makes sense. Because when you have the prequels, who set him up as, like, this big hero, well, you have the, like, slow de-evolution of him, right? He's like becoming a worse and worse person, and, like, you can believe he's becoming evil at the end. That's still, like, a pretty big character flip, if that makes sense, from, like, totally good to, like, 100% evil, right? So, like, he still is the kind of personality that once he commits to a path, he commits to it 100%. So I feel like that's part of why I can still see him going on that journey were he to survive, is because when he commits to something, he does 100% commit to it. You have to give him that. Once he commits to it, he's like, I'm all in now, actually.
I mean, only when he's evil, though. He wasn't exactly committed to the Jedi way, was he?
I mean, he was. He refused to leave. Even though, like...
Except he's not acting like one. He's constantly breaking their rules and breaking his vows. Like, he's not all that committed.
But he is still there, if that makes sense. Like, he doesn't ever, like, quit being a Jedi until he stops being a Jedi.
What we also canonically know, he's already thinking about leaving.
That's true, but he still hasn't.
This is why I made Anakin his own section. I think Anakin is complicated. I think there is redemption in Anakin's story. And that there is a cosmic redemption happening for Anakin. I don't think I would ever call it a redemption arc. I'm not, like, a super big fan of redemption through death, which was the other pin I put in something earlier. It's not super satisfying to me. I don't love the idea that Anakin comes back as a ghost. But, you know, like, there is redemption happening there. It is a cosmic thing. You know, there's a divine intervention kind of happening with Anakin. It's going to hit for some people. It doesn't always hit for me.
I do say that the whole ghost thing, it made way more sense when it's just like, sometimes the Force let you do that. Whereas, like, now it's like, oh, you have to train for years to be able to do it. And, like, Qui-Gon did it, and then he taught... Oh, that doesn't make any sense.
Listen, the Force ghosts have never made sense.
Doesn't make any sense. Sometimes the Force lets you come back if you still have a job to do. That's the end-all, be-all. That's where I should have stopped. There should be no training. Sometimes the Force is like, you have unfinished business, go back, say your thing, and, like, hang out for a little bit till you're done, and then you're going to be part of the ghost thing. Like, that's how we had it originally. That's how it should have stayed, and I don't like that they didn't stick with that, because it's annoying. Why are we making up rules and making training for this?
Yeah, I actually like it the other direction. I prefer that, like, it's a skill that you can learn if you're a good person, but, like, it does take effort, and that's the whole point, is that being good takes effort, and I appreciate that, like, there is work that has to go through that Anakin is incapable of doing. Like, I can see the other one as well, but I kind of like the idea that, like, you have to, like, it's a good guy skill, you know, that Anakin is just incapable of practicing.
I think you're starting on opposite sides.
Yeah.
Where it's, if Anakin comes back as a Force ghost, it makes more sense to work like this versus this is more interesting of a concept if you have to put in the work. Ignoring, and then therefore Anakin shouldn't have come back as a ghost at all. That's stupid.
I'm like,
yeah.
no.
I'm saying
like you're starting from different assumptions.
Yeah, world building wise, that would be a way fucking cooler system. But that's not what I have in the story. What I have in the story is that Anakin definitively comes back as a Force ghost, and if order for that to work, it can't be a skill because it makes no sense. He dies, and then he's a Force ghost. There's no.
Yeah, but that's not even how it was set up with Obi-Wan. Like, Obi-Wan's whole thing is like, oh, like, I've got a power you can't even imagine. Like, there is an element of that that's like, I've learned how to do this, and I can do it on command. It doesn't just happen.
Right, but he could be like, you know, I have a feeling. I have a vibe. I have a vibe that I'll come back, actually. Because that's how the Force works.
That doesn't seem to be how it's implied, but regardless. Anyway, we need to wrap Anakin up. We need to wrap this up.
I promise that we'll have an opportunity to talk about Anakin again.
Yeah.
I would love a goat fact. Yeah.
Give me a goat fact.
I picked this one special just for us.
Yeah.
The reason that some people think that goats are satanic is because the well-known occult deity Baphomet resembles a goat. And the concept of Baphomet who was a pagan idol in the Middle Ages. The Templar knights, religious knights participating in the crusade, for the record, supposedly prayed to this deity. And then the church was like, that's bad. Stop doing that. And everyone was like, and now we're all going to say goats are evil, everybody, because this pagan idol looks like a goat.
Looks like a goat.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Our intro and outro music is Mos Eisley Cantina by Speed Kicks. Angela and I edit, our artwork is by me, and Sugar is our writer and researcher. You can find us on Instagram and Tumblr at Unleash the Goats. Thanks for listening.